All right, doing a little bit of work on the Volkswagen engine. If we can get it in frame way down there, in natural form. I put it on the ground because, that makes it harder, so why not? But we finally got the cylinder head off, and if you followed this build, it ran, but it was, questionable. And so, pulled the valve cover. I had readjusted the valve train, but I didn't take a moment to necessarily wiggle around the valves. Your first assumption is that it's probably not burned up and torched. You can see we can get this in frame. This exhaust valve, was found to be exceptionally loose. Check this out. I thought it burned a valve. It actually smoked the cylinder head. Now on Volkswagens, the heads wear basically as time goes on. So your valve adjustment, these are solid lifters, so you have valve lash, and it gets tighter and tighter. And if you don't stay up on top of that, eventually valves start to hang open and you'll burn a valve or burn a cylinder head. So I think we kind of figured out the mystery why the old 67 was parked, sometime in the early 80s. I know it had an engine fire, but this was probably the nail in the coffin as to why it ultimately got parked. So luckily, a nice chap, John Crowley, sent me a couple of single port 1600 cylinder heads, which are, mildly rare, not super common. So a big thank you. I'm going to clean them up and we'll throw them on this engine, see what we have. So, and maybe finally the Volkswagen will run. Who knows? I'm not going to get my hopes up. It is a Volkswagen after all. Just to pique my curiosity here, we're just going to get the engine in a different location. And I really, like I said, don't even need a wrench to do this. Not a lot of compression there. And once again, to no surprise, you can't hear a darn thing. Now on solid lifters, there should be some lash, some play when you're on the base circle of the cam, and there's absolutely none on this engine. So we're gonna set valves the Thunderhead 289 style. And the reason I like this method the most is it doesn't matter what engine it is. You don't have to follow any certain procedure. If you use your brain and apply this method to any engine, it works perfect. Now on this particular one, it's solid lifters, so we're doing valve lash, but it's the same thing for getting to zero lash on hydraulic lifters before you make your 1/2 to 3/4 of a turn valve train preload adjustment. But on this, it's valve lash, so we're gonna come down here, slide under, see if I can hold my hand steady, and basically we're gonna turn the engine over. Let's look at cylinder number 2 here. All right, so either that's the intake or the exhaust on left that's going down. We're gonna rotate the engine over until that is at max lift, which it's at right now. So this is at the very tippity top of the toppity tip of the cam lobe, and at that point, the opposing valve on that cylinder is gonna be on the base circle of the cam. So over here, our valve here, it's on the base circle, and this is the point when we're gonna make our valve train adjustment on this valve. And likewise, if we were to go around again, eventually, there we go. That opposing valve is now coming up to max lift. There's no camshaft on this planet that when the opposing valve is at max lift, this valve will not be on the base circle of the cam. When one's at max lift, the other one is going to be on the base circle, and you can make your valve train adjustment on that valve at that point. So in this case, we're at max lift over here. We're going to do our valve train adjustment on this guy. And this is a two-hand endeavor, but basically what I'm going to do is take my 6/1000 feeler gauge. We're going to slide it in between the set screw here and the end of the valve. We're going to run that set screw down until it just barely engages our feeler gauge, and then we're going to hold it in that spot and then tighten up our locking nut. It's just that simple. All right, so here we go, max lift. Let's run that adjustment screw out a little bit. All right, plenty of play action. See if we can get this bad boy in here. Okay, there we go. I'm just going to run that set screw down until it's down to our feeler gauge. 0 lash. Here's the tricky part. That is not the right wrench. Now in theory, that set screw can't move, and if you don't have enough hands, what you can actually do is put like a 7/1000 feeler gauge in here, since we're going for 6/1000, and tighten it down to hold the feeler gauge in, which I've done here. And then we just want to make sure this adjustment screw doesn't move on us. And we're going to essentially tighten our lock nut, which is where I assume someone might have went wrong too. Okay, so now that comes out. There you go. You should hear that on solid lifters when you're on the base circle. And when I didn't hear that on the engine, I knew we were in trouble. So we're going to work through the rest of the valve train like this. Again, when the opposing valve is at max lift, that's when you make your adjustment. So again, max lift, adjust this one. That way your valve train is done correct, and you can do it this way for any engine. Obviously, the difference between hydraulic lifters is you're going to do a preload, and solid lifters you're going to be playing with valve lash here. But as far as when to make the adjustment, this is a very easy way to go about doing it without making any mistakes. Alright, so the valve train is all where it's supposed to be, at least within reason at this point. So I'm going to try and refire the engine, but really with what we've seen, I'm very reluctant to run the engine too long. It's probably got some real nasty blow-by on that intake valve, and we're just pumping gas fumes and everything else and carbon into our crankcase, trying to run the engine like this. So I'm just curious if it runs any better. I'm sure it will. But with that, let's just fire it one more time and see if that made any difference. That knock, definitely on cylinder 1. It's pulsing through the carburetor pretty bad too. Infinitely better throttle response with the valve train correct though. Imagine that. Bad. Otherwise, it seems pretty healthy.